Philip is just in.
Oh, that's good. That's good. So that wait for you.
Hey, Philip. Hi, Philip.
Hi, good afternoon again. Thanks for joining us at Kitson Migration Advisory. This is a special session that we have a few distinguished guests with us to share about the migration, business and investment opportunity in South Australia. Today we have a few speakers, most speakers that we actually have since our Facebook Live session been going for so many rounds. We have Philip Grifoni, Manager Business Migration, Department of Innovation and Skilled Immigration, South Australia. Then we have our distinguished guest from KPMG, Ashley Miller. He's a partner, KPMG Private Enterprise, KPMG Australia. Simon Campbell, Head of Corporate Finance, KPMG Australia. All of them will be sharing with you the current opportunity for doing a business and also investment in South Australia. So each of them will have a slide presentation about the current economy, also the opportunity in South Australia, and Philip will be also sharing with you the type of visa that allow you to set up and invest in Australia and South Australia. So at the end of the presentation, we will be open up the floor for Q&A. If you have any question, do type in the comment part on the Facebook, and we will try to take as much question as possible. If you were to miss out your question, not to worry. We will get the respective person to contact you personally to get in touch with you. So without further ado, I will pass the floor to Philip.
Do you still have the presentation from last time, or do you want me to?
I don't have Philip. Sorry, the presentation is not with me.
That's
so
okay.
Yeah.
Maybe if you could start with somebody else, and I'll get it up on the screen. Oh, actually, hang on, I've got it.
Then you don't mind, Ashley? We'll start from the
No problem.
point of view.
Okay. And good afternoon, everybody. And thanks very much, Jimmy, for the introduction. I just intend to give an overview of really what's been happening here in Australia, in particular, for us to focus on South Australia from an economic point of view, and then also just talk about how the government's actually been helping industry and also individuals in a particularly challenging environment, not only here in Australia, but also around the world. My main sources of information for today are going to be from the Australian Reserve Bank. So that's a government authority that sets the monetary policy, and I'll be referring to the minutes from their last meeting. I'll also be drawing some notes from our own internal research that was prepared by our national economic lead. So they'll be the two main sources for things that I will actually discuss. So as some of you may be aware, Australia has almost gone 30 years as an economy that hasn't suffered a recession, one of the leading economies in the world in terms of its ability to grow year on year. However, we will see a decline in the quarter, particularly based upon the impact of the pandemic. So the overall economic activity did contract very significantly in late March and April. But the recent data that the Reserve Bank has seen has suggested that the economy has begun to recover over the course of May. And certainly I think Simon and I, when we look at the activity and us going out, and we're now seeing clients and actively involved in business. And in fact, some of our clients are looking at reasonable acquisition in terms of what has happened. Some of the categories of what we call discretionary spending had contracted in March, the largest, of course, was in retail spending, so that did decline, and that basically continued to fall fairly sharply in April, and so that's what had happened. But again, some of the retail and household spending had actually started to recover in May. So we are a little bit concerned. The unemployment rate did actually increase, and I'll talk a little bit about that later, but it was less than expected. So actual unemployment is at 6.2%, which you might surprise some people in terms of where that actually took. But part of it is some of the government policy, which I'll go through shortly, and in particular what the Australian government have done, which we call JobKeeper. The actual number of hours that people have worked basically, I think, went down on average 9 hours per week. So there was a decline, I guess, in productivity, and a number of people have been stood down without pay and have since become unemployed. So we do expect the unemployment rate to increase around there. There has been, though, in terms of the impact of the economy, as perhaps you've seen in Malaysia as well, lower fuel prices, if I can say the word correctly, free childcare and various other initiatives just to help with household sort of spending. When it comes to the home market, house prices have been started to fall in some of the locations around Australia, but the overall turnover has remained fairly low. So a number of people haven't elected to put their houses on the market around that. And we've had significant support by Australia's big banks, so the 4 large banks. And globally, I think they've got the capital support that rank them in the top 10 banks in the world. And so those banks have actually been supporting the economy. And only, I think, yesterday, the Australian banks announced that they were in the position that they could extend the ability of people to repay loans. So a number of people have gone on repayment holidays. When I was listening to the CEO of ANZ Bank yesterday, he was indicating a lot of people asked for help, but quite a number of those people didn't actually need the help and kept making repayments to their home loans. But nevertheless, the banks, the 4 large banks, agreed to extend the holiday, if one needed that, for their home loan repayments out another 6 months. There is some evidence, certainly that I have seen, particularly in Sydney and Melbourne, where some house prices have actually fallen back a little bit, but that's on the back of fairly significant growth around that. So the government, both Australian federal government and state-based system, and particularly here in South Australia, have been spending quite a large amount of money supporting various initiatives around that. And just to give you an indication what the Australian government has done, they basically, for people who were without a job, so the Australian government has unemployment benefits, they did an additional supplement of that of $550 a fortnight. So that's quite a large amount of money. About an extra $14 billion was going into the economy over the 6 months ending September around that. They also gave additional support for people who were older Australians or on disability, which accounted for about $4 billion. And then on top of that, they also announced what was called the JobKeeper payment. And that, I think, was around initially they announced 130 billion. Apparently there was less required. So that ended up being about $70 billion. And there's numerous other state-based packages. So here in South Australia, they announced another $1 billion on top of the federal scheme. So in terms of support packages on nominal GDP, that accounts for roughly 11%. And that places Australia fairly high in terms of the major economies around the world. The other thing is, relative to a lot of economies, we are a fairly low debt federal government. And as a consequence of that, we are able to support a number of countries around. If you're looking to borrow funds, the interbank rate, that's currently around 14.14 is the interbank rate. So that's the lowest I've ever seen in my life, and I'm old. Yeah, I just can't believe it. So again, I've supported some clients recently with borrowing funds, and the rates are quite cheap. The published rate is 0.25. But nevertheless, the interbank rate is actually lower than that. And so that's actually a very low rate. So I just wanted to give that as an overview. We are seeing, though, things picking up there. However, Victoria, which is one of the states in Australia, Melbourne is the main city there. They've gone in lockdown because their numbers have been increasing. If we look at it in terms of world concept, it's actually not too bad, but they've done another lockdown with a view of trying to get these numbers down. We're fortunate in South Australia. Effectively, we've had no cases for a couple of months. We've had the occasional person who's come in from overseas and one person who failed to report them. But if you strip it back, South Australia's had no cases in a couple of months. And obviously that's helped in terms of our local economy. And as I said, the state government is supporting, but I do see a fair bit of additional business activity around there. So that's it very much at a high level, Jimmy. So appreciate that we're going to do Q&A later. I'm also a tax accounting specialist. So if there's any particular tax accounting questions, I'm happy to answer them. But I may refer to my expert as well, Anna, who's also available on the call. So thanks very much, Jimmy.
Thanks, Ashley, for sharing. Glad to hear that things are all in order in SA.
Well, the best they can be, given what's happening.
Pray for the best for Victoria and Melbourne, so everything hopefully go at the right direction for them. And next, we would like to have Philip. Can we have you for the next presentation?
No problem.
Yeah,
no problem.
Mr. Philip will share with you the type of visa available for those who are interested to migrate, to start or even invest in South Australia. What kind of visa will allow you to do what, and what is the prerequisite requirement for all this visa? So, Philip, will you have the honor? I have the honor to have you present it.
No problem. I'll just share screen. 1 second.
While we're waiting for Philip to get ready, just a bit of update for the information. Oh, okay, here you are. Thanks, Philip.
Can you see?
Yes, of course.
Okay. So thank you very much to Dato, Michael Yong, and Kitson Migration Advisory for inviting me this afternoon to share a little bit about the business migration program in South Australia. Very, very thankful to Kitson's support and invitation over many years of providing clients to South Australia. Very appreciative of the other South Australian companies that were invited to attend, and we're able to let you guys know a little bit more about taxation and other important issues in Australia and within South Australia as well. So I'm not going to read word for word off this presentation, but essentially this presentation this afternoon will cover a number of different topics. So it's going to have an introduction to the different types of business visas available for Australia, which visa may be right for you, and then obviously once the travel restrictions to Australia are lifted, how you could possibly come and visit us in South Australia as well. And naturally we'll have reasons why you should consider business migration to South Australia. Essentially, business migration to Australia is an Australian federal government migration program. It's been going for more than 20 years. So every state in Australia participates in the program. So South Australia, Victoria, New South Wales, Queensland, etc. They all participate in the program. Some states get lots of applications, and then some states get not many applications at all. So fortunately, South Australia now receives large numbers of applications every financial year. And so over the last 8 years, there's been constant growth in the program from a low base to a very, very high figure last year. So this program's aimed at bringing skills and investment to Australia. And certainly it's introduced a lot of very, very successful business people to South Australia over a long period of time. We're certainly happy that a program like this exists, so because it introduces and gives us our chance to know successful business people from overseas who will do business in South Australia as well. There's two different levels of government in Australia that have an involvement with the application process. You've got the state government, which is who I work for, and we deal with the nomination. Nomination is a client applying to us with an online application through their agent, and then proposing to do business in South Australia. So if that meets our requirements, then we'll approve the nomination, and the client will get invited to apply for that business visa through the Department of Home Affairs. So the Department of Home Affairs is Australian federal government, and they're in charge of the granting of and setting the requirements of all visas to Australia. So I'm going to speak about two different types of visas today. One is a provisional or temporary business visa, which is valid for 4 years, and it has a pathway to permanent residency once certain state and federal requirements are met. And then I'll also speak about a straight to permanent residency business visa, which clients can apply for. And it's the only straight to permanent residency business visa in Australia. So at the moment on the screen is roughly what the application process is. There's a intention to apply, and then there'll be expression of interest through the federal department, applying then for state nomination, and then if the nomination is approved, the client can lodge the visa application and get in the visa processing queue. So the next part of the slide, sorry, I'll bring it up. That explains the different levels of government and their role in the application process. So on the map of Australia, on the right, that's South Australia. That's where I'm from, and that's where Ashley is based, and several other people are based as well. So generally speaking, the client would apply to us, and then from there, they would lodge the visa application. So which visa may be right for you? So we would suggest speaking to Kitson, and that because everyone's situation is different, and depending on the circumstances and documentation might determine which visa you might be able to apply for. So the first visa I'll speak about is a 188 visa. So this is granted for 4 years. There's 5 different streams actually of this visa, but I'm going to concentrate on 3 streams today, and they are 188A, 188B, and 188C. The requirements that are on the screen there are the Australian federal government requirements to get the business visa in the first place. So they are for the 188A, B, and C. They're all distinctly different types of visas. 188A, if granted, will require the client to do 2 years of consecutive business in South Australia, and then meet state and federal requirements, and then apply for permanent residency. So 188A is an active management and business type of visa, whereas 188B and 188C, they simply require investments into either state government bonds or a compliant investment into a fund. once again, they have certain state and federal requirements that must be met before you can apply for permanent residency. So the 188 is granted for 4 years, and it's within the 4 years that certain requirements must be met. And then there is a pathway to permanent residency through the 888 series, so 888A, B, C, etc. So from there, South Australia receives applications for 188A, 188B, 188C, etc. There's no state preference for the type of applications we receive, and all of the requirements are published on our website for both under 55 years of age or 55 years of age and over. So it's very, very clear, very, very transparent, black and white, and there's no new rule or new requirement that you have to meet after you apply. The next visa I'll speak about is the 132 business visa. So there's once again 2 different streams for this visa, 132A and 132B. So I'll concentrate on 132A, business talent, significant business history. The requirements that are on the screen here are once again the Australian federal government requirements on the applicant to get the business visa. South Australia, over the last 4.5 years, is the #1 state in terms of percentages of applicants that apply to Australia for this visa. So between 50 and 60% of all of the applications for Australia for this particular visa apply to South Australia. So in order to get the visa, the requirements that are on the screen are what must be met from a documentation evidence perspective. So this visa is a straight to permanent residency business visa, and it requires the visa holder to do 2 years of consecutive high-level business in South Australia and manage a business with documentation, evidence, management and decision making. So South Australia meets with all of its 132 clients every 6 months over those 2 years, because after the 2 years of business, there's a state and federal review on the applicant's business activities over the previous 2 years. So if you're looking to apply for 132A or 188A, South Australia has a requirement that you have to have visited South Australia previously. So of course that could have been 6 months ago, 12 months ago, 18 months ago. You just have to have evidence of a visit to South Australia previously. So if you had a copy of the boarding pass, copy of hotel accommodation or expenses incurred under your own credit card or bank card in South Australia, that would all be considered. But if for whatever reason you had no evidence or you had not visited, then I would suggest speaking to Kitson to help arrange a visit to South Australia, obviously once those particular travel restrictions are lifted. Every South Australian client over the last 20 years that's met at least the minimum state requirement for business or hire has always successfully passed the state or federal review. So at the moment, every state in Australia, they haven't been given their allocation. So every state in Australia gets a quota or a number that they can nominate for a particular financial year. And ordinarily, every state would know on the 1st of July or thereabouts what that number would be, and they would be all open and accepting applications. So at the moment, we're waiting for the federal department to confirm what number we'll receive, and we hope it's bigger than last year. Last year we did 780 nominations, so we're hoping for a bigger number. And once we have that number, then we can set up and open the application system and begin receiving applications as well. And certainly once we get the allocation, we'll communicate that immediately to Kitson and all of the agencies that we deal with, so that we can start receiving applications, because we're very, very interested in receiving as many applications as possible. And of course, we regard this program as very, very important to the state. In terms of if you get the 132 visa, what choice of businesses that you can choose to conduct, well, we've tried to keep it very open and very, very flexible. So you have a choice to manage a business, obviously invest some money and manage the business with decisions and documents and evidence, and you can choose to employ 4 full-time equivalent staff. If for whatever reason you didn't want to choose that requirement, then you could choose to export a minimum of $600,000 Australian purchase price of South Australian goods or services. So from that, that can be 50% wine and 50% non-wine, or 100% not wine. So the higher the percentage of wine above 600,000, above 50% wine, the higher the figure must be. So for example, if I was under 55 years of age and I wanted to export 100% wine, then that figure would be $1 million. So obviously South Australia has a lot of products and a lot of industries, and I'll detail them a little bit later on, because over 20 years, clients have employed, clients have exported, and clients have invested. So for example, if I wanted to invest $1.5 million into a South Australian new or existing business, that would be an option, and that would also include property development as well in South Australia. So there's no state government preference for the type of business activity that you do. If you chose to export, there's no preference for the type of product that you could export as well. And then obviously, if you are aged 55 or over at the time that you apply for state nomination, then essentially the 4 full-time staff become 8. The minimum export becomes 1.2 million, and the minimum investment into a South Australian company becomes 3 million, except for property development, that becomes 2 million. So here's a very, very brief snapshot about all of the different states in Australia and what their 132 policy is. We believe the South Australian policy is very, very attractive, competitive, and very, very flexible. So we haven't chosen to restrict types of businesses. We've kept it fairly open because clients have got a lot of skills and knowledge that they can apply to doing business in South Australia as well. As I said before, generally speaking, clients for 1AA and 132A, if they haven't visited South Australia, then we'd suggest speaking to Kitson, who can assist in applying for the relevant type of visa which will allow you to come and visit us in South Australia as well. So you can include spouse and dependent children on the 600 visitor visa, and I'm sure other types of short stay visas for Australia. But then also with the 188 and 132 visas, you can include spouse and dependent children, and they would also have full work rights and full study rights in South Australia as well. So that's just an image of the capital of South Australia. So the capital of South Australia is Adelaide. It's quite large in terms of size of land, but it's quite small compared to some other cities in terms of population. It does have probably 8 or 9 different regional areas in South Australia, and all of them have got different climate, different industries, and they produce different products as well. I mean, over the 20 years of the program in South Australia, business migration clients have invested into anything and everything, from traditional style investments into wineries and agriculture, farms, education, property development, etc., to new style and new age investments into solar, and then also into port infrastructure, etc. In terms of housing options in South Australia, for 132s and 188s, then there's a lot of different choices available, from apartments, whether or not they're by the sea, or houses in suburbs, to townhouses in suburbs or apartments closer to the city, newer builds. You'll all find them generally 40 to 50% cheaper or more competitive than Melbourne and Sydney as well. So there's certainly no lack of choice, especially now. That's just a different angle of Adelaide for the capital. Malaysia is the second top market in terms of source country for numbers of applicants for business migration program, and it has been for the last 4 or 5 years as well. If I had to describe South Australia in a few words, I would say clean, green, safe environment with good business opportunities. So the photo on the screen hasn't been photoshopped at all. So that's actually an area in Kangaroo Island where actually the wildlife comes up to. In terms of industries available, so if you're considering exporting either for a migration requirement or separate to a migration requirement, just because you wanted to export, then South Australia's got a number of large industries with meat and seafood, obviously, and then there's honey and olive oil, nuts and fruits and vegetables and everything like that, and many other industries. But probably one of the largest, if not the largest industry in South Australia is the red wine industry. So South Australia roughly produces about 53% all of the red wine for Australia. We also produce around 80% of the premium red wine for Australia. So of course, Penfolds is made in South Australia, and many clients have exported Penfold successfully for migration requirements, but then they've also successfully exported hundreds of other brands and types of wine as well. But once again, it's completely the client's choice what types of products they'd like to export from South Australia. Our requirement is that they're either made, built or grown in South Australia as well. In terms of education that's available, I mean, most of the universities in South Australia are located within the CBD. With 188 and 132 visa holders, their children can attend the local government public school and pay the local fee, provided that being the fact that they need to either rent a house or buy a house in the school zone in Adelaide or South Australia, and all of the school zones are different. Now, of course, with private school, then generally speaking, they don't have such a requirement. Their requirement is to pay the fee, and all of the fees are different depending on the school and the popularity, history, and academic results, etc. With university, 132 clients and their children, they can attend universities in South Australia and pay local fee. The 188 visa holders and their family will pay international fee until they achieve permanent residency. So once they've achieved permanent residency, then once again they could access a local fee for university as well. This is a trade and investment website. You can search in English, you can search in Chinese as well, in Mandarin. And so obviously it's not a government endorsed website, but it's just a website where companies can list for free because they're either currently dealing with business clients or they'd like to deal with business clients. There's many different industries that are listed on there as well. So we believe we've got a lot of assistance and knowledge that we can use to assist clients as well. We believe that we've got very flexible nomination requirements. Of course, we meet with clients constantly, so we become very familiar with the client and what they're doing in South Australia, and it allows us to better understand the program as well. And certainly between Malaysia and China, probably represents 93–94% of the entire program. And of course, from Malaysia, many clients speak English as well, but with Mandarin as well, we've certainly got a lot of staff that can assist as well. So once again, I'm very thankful for the opportunity again for being able to present this afternoon, and certainly thank you for taking some time out of your afternoon in Malaysia to hearing a little bit more about business migration in South Australia. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Philip, for sharing with us the requirement for all those business and investor visa. For those of us, if you have any question pertaining to this visa, feel free to type in the comment section. We will will answer to your question as soon as our next presenter. We have Simon Campbell, Head of Corporate Finance, KPMG. Simon?
Thank you, Jimmy. Thanks, Kitson, and thanks to Philip and Ashley for the presentation so far. So I lead the corporate finance team at KPMG in South Australia, and I think really on the back of some of the comments that Ashley and Philip have outlined around, I guess, the attractiveness of South Australia. What we see are a lot of investment opportunities currently in the market. In terms of where the state is at relative to others and relative to other international markets with respect to COVID, certainly seeing the investment market starting to pick up. And we, like everywhere else globally, sort of slow down in transaction processes, investment opportunities, etc., as the uncertainty prevailed through February, March, April. We're in a position where we haven't had new COVID cases, where the economy is starting to move again, and trade flows, both through the ports and the airport, are starting to become stronger. And that presents a number of opportunities for both passive and operational investment. So in my role, I advise clients who are buying companies or investing capital in companies, but also entities which are selling and raising capital. So a big part of my role is effectively matching capital to opportunities. Where we're mostly seeing those opportunities are in the state's primary growth sectors, and that's the agricultural space, and I'll include in that food and wine. We are a big primary production centre. We're a tremendous wine region, and that presents opportunities throughout the value chain. We have facilitated a number of investments in large-scale primary production assets, talking about cattle stations, cropping properties, water licenses, and these types of more passive investments, horticulture assets, and then also stepping along that value chain in the food space. South Australia, and I think coming out of it, it'll be strengthened, is seen as a clean production basin for food. The sort of brand Australia and brand South Australia in food is very strong, and that's opened up some really good export markets. Asia is a primary, but also Europe and the Americas beyond, and that extends, beyond the historical sort of bastion of wine, where there is a tremendous amount of South Australian wine exported, and that presents investment opportunities through production wineries and vineyards, but also on the food space. We have everything from beef and other sort of animal commodities to grains, and also particularly the sort of fresh produce, so the seafood, the tuna, the crayfish, these types of products, and there are opportunities in that aquaculture value chain, and also in the primary production value chain for investment. Beyond the agriculture, defence has been and will be a big growth engine for South Australia going forward. So we've got a number of major defence projects which are at various stages, and which has led to the development of a facility called Techport. A number of very large multinational, what's called a prime contractor, are leading projects there. So your British American or BAE Systems, Lockheed Martin, and Naval Group are primaries. But what that means is that there's a lot of South Australian companies who are looking to get themselves more involved in that defence work and the defence supply chain, and a number of those require capital to do so. So we do see a number of opportunities where there might be a manufacturing company who has a particular engineering and manufacturing skill set, but with investment can retool their factories and expand to enable themselves to be positioned for defence projects. So that's an area of current investment opportunity, and an area that will get stronger going forward. On the property front, and we can look at property in terms of office holdings, residential, industrial, and also on the tourism side. Property in Adelaide, like everywhere else sort of globally, is probably going through that state of flux. And you look at commercial, there's question marks around office space requirements, both on a utilisation going forward with a more pronounced work from home, but also in the space per employee requirements. And certainly some property forecasters are anticipating that those two might equal themselves out. But if you look at South Australia as opposed to other Australian cities in the property space, the yields or the returns on property investment have typically sat higher, particularly on the commercial and industrial property. And we see opportunities across office buildings, car parks, and other passive property investments. On the more active side, while tourism is challenged given the lack of travel, at the moment, like travel possibilities, certainly when you talk to the main stakeholders here, and I was with the management team at the airport here as recently as yesterday, there is a view that over the long term there will be a recovery, of course, in international and domestic tourism numbers, but in the short term there is a real impetus on intrastate travel, with Adelaide residents pushing to the regions and utilising regional tourism infrastructure. So we've got one project certainly at the moment in the regions, which is quite a large resort and leisure development, which will still proceed in this climate. I think there will be others. You've got the after effects of bushfires plus COVID, which has slowed that tourism market, but which still has pretty good medium to long-term fundamentals, and investors getting in at the earlier stage have opportunities to get some pretty strong returns there. Take on a slightly different risk profile in a new greenfield development to purchasing an already existing asset, but we've got a couple of opportunities we're aware of in that space which have pretty good return profiles. In other sectors, certainly South Australia has made a push to be a driving force behind the development of space tech companies, ag tech, and more broadly in the early stage tech company space. And we've got a facility here called Lot 14, and that's previously was utilised as a site for a major hospital in the CBD of Adelaide. The buildings there have been retrofitted to essentially become a hub for early stage, high growth, high tech companies, and that's got the National Space Agency there. It's got a number of other key hubs emerging around hyperscale computing and certain other key technology verticals. And there are a number of companies there who are regularly raising capital at the early stage and are open to investment from private individuals at certain scales. We're seeing quite a lot of investment in resources and mining projects, which arise on a quite a regular basis, and a lot of that investment is foreign that comes in there and can be larger scale, high payoff type projects. And another one which is worth touching on there is also the education space. I think we're sort of seeing a short to mid-term slowdown in that space, but we're sort of anticipating that there is an avenue, certainly that Australia and particularly South Australia will be able to sell itself as a relatively safe destination, having come out of COVID or being in a position with regard to COVID that is very strong and that has been very well managed by the government here. And that suggests that the state will be able to market itself quite strongly as a destination for international students once again. In terms of investment opportunities in the state, it comes down to that risk profiling and the risk return profiling of each individual investor as to what projects will be attractive, and also consideration of passive v active investments. So there's certainly investment opportunities for those who may look to migrate to South Australia, acquire a business that they can get actively involved in, either operating or growing, or in the more passive sense, investing in projects. And one sort of example that has had a lot of investment, particularly from the Malaysian market, is a tourism project by the coast in South Australia, which is proceeding quite well, which KPMG has had quite a lot of involvement in, and it's quite a passive investment for its participants. So there's a whole range in between. In terms of the legal framework and the directors' duties and the protections for investors, Australia is a pretty sound market on a global scale. With regard to taxation, we've got certainly circumstances that require investors to get a pretty good grasp of their own circumstances and the impact that can have on their investment profile, but certainly pretty investable conditions within the state and within Australia. Where we can help facilitate that is where there is an opportunity or an appetite for someone out of Malaysia and on this call to make an investment in South Australia. We have an active list of opportunities that are available at any point in time, and we're happy to have a discussion with those who may seek to explore them. Thanks, Jimmy. I think that's probably the overview, and I'm open to taking questions should anyone have anything.
Sorry, I put my mic on mute. Thanks for sharing with us, Simon, on all the point that you shared with us. Now we'll open up the floor for Q&A. So those who have questions about the current economy and business opportunity in South Australia, and also in terms of requirements and conditions of business and investor migration to Australia, we will feel free to type in the comment section. We will try to take as much or as many questions as possible. If you fail to do so, please not worry, we will contact you personally. We have a first question here. In fact, is Kitson migration client. We directed this question specifically to Philip. His name is Mr. Khan. Hey Philip, I'm a Kitson migration client. I was told an intention to apply was lodged with the department. May I know, once the state nomination open, will it be queue based on first in, first out?
So once the program opens, then certainly we've always said that we'd be looking to invite the people who have lodged the intention to apply in the first case. So, and we'd be looking to apply and invite those people as soon as we can once we get the allocation.
Do you have any estimation or any forecast on the timeline when will it be open for nomination?
I wouldn't like to say a date, because it could be sooner, it could be later, but we'd say as soon as we get the places, we will write to the market and we'll open very shortly after that.
Thanks for that, Philip. Okay, the next question is for I'm not sure either Simon or Ashley will best answer. Is the local bank are still very tight on providing business loan, especially property development? So I'm quite sure this gentleman here is intention to do some small or medium-sized development in South Australia. Is it possible for them to secure a loan from the commercial bank in Adelaide?
Yeah. So, sorry, Simon, I'll let you talk first.
No, okay. You're welcome to go, but I was just going to say, look, it's very project dependent. Certainly, the banks have tightened up, and you know I think like most banks globally have had through this period a lot of applications from existing customers to defer principal repayments on loan financing. I think generally the big four banks particularly been very supportive. Some banks are in a better position than others, particularly we had a banking royal commission and not all banks came out in as good a shape as others. And certainly pre-COVID, there were certain banks which were more aggressively pricing and pursuing new lens. There is a lens of caution for any new to bank borrower and any new to bank project, with the focus being on existing customers, but by no means are the banks closed for business. What I expect though is that, you know, with regard to say property projects, the LVRs, the loan to value ratios will fall. The margins, the cost of debt will increase marginally, but bear in mind that the base rate in recent times has fallen, so the cost of debt is still, you know, on a long-term average basis, still pretty competitive. But the banks are wanting to see more equity in projects and are more cautious and more thorough in their diligence of their lens.
Thanks, Simon. I'll just make a couple of observations. I did work for one of the major banks for approximately 10 years. Exactly what Simon indicated, that's the case. New to bank is sometimes a little bit more challenging, but fundamentally, as Simon indicated, it depends on the loan to value ratio that we're actually talking about and the ability to service the income. Sometimes with people offshore, that can be a little bit more challenging, but equally we can assist by having maybe some money on deposit initially, then we can release those funds as we work through them. So we try and negotiate with the banks, and depending on the needs, the quantum of the funds as well from the client's point of view. But yeah, we work our way through that. I call it a beauty parade, but basically we try and see what offerings the different banks have at various points in time. So yeah, we're happy to assist on that.
Oh, thanks for the update. This is a very special question by Hamad Rahman. He said, with the current high unemployment in Australia, okay, of course they will see a decline in retail spending and also household spending. Being so, what is your view in the investment in terms of retail businesses in this current moment? Is it a good time to go in, or they should have wait until the economy recovers?
Yeah, I guess Simon might have some comments about this. I guess, you know, I look at some of my clients who at their various points in time would have been regarded as particularly brave with their investment strategy, depending what has happened. And I have a number of clients from Malaysia who have made investments in Malaysia. And a lot of their peers may have said, because of particular events that were happening, that, and I'm talking a long time ago, that they decided to make these investments, and it actually worked out well for the family. I guess, as Simon indicated, some of the asset values may have declined, and it may in fact be not a bad opportunity. But like everything, you've got to take potentially a longer term view, or buying against the cycle. So there can be those opportunities that are around that are there. So Simon might have a different view than me, but I think ultimately it depends on your strategy, what you're about, and you know, as Warren Buffett says, if the price goes down, you just buy more hamburgers for your dollar. So, you know, I always bear that in mind when people are talking about corrections, and obviously it's a challenging environment globally. Australia's not doing too bad though. So I just point that out. So Simon, you might have a slightly different view than mine.
No, I largely agree with that. I think obviously household spending down, unemployment up, household savings are up, which suggests a more conservative viewpoint. And I think there is a lot of wait and see in Australia. There's a JobKeeper supplement, which is essentially the government paying employees for businesses who've had severe turnover impact from the COVID-19. Now that is due to end currently in September. There's a lot of talk that the government might extend that to certain beyond that time frame for certain sectors, and I think that there'll be a really good litmus test in sort of October to get a real true understanding of where the economy is at. I think that obviously the great hope is that there is momentum ahead of that, and that the trail off of that JobKeeper payment won't have a huge impact. But certainly across the retail sector, there has been a lot of impact, you know, bricks and mortar retail. Then conversely, you know, you're seeing a lot of freight movements through online shopping. I think once there is a pent-up demand for certain goods that will arise through the increased household savings, and do expect that to be deployed at a point. I think just the overall is that Australia has held up to date pretty well, and that I expect that when the economy does start to recover, it will start to recover quite quickly.
Yeah,
which will.
I guess further to that last comment of Simon, the dialogue with the executives and the owners that we're talking about is not so much about crisis, it's around recovery. And I guess part of that is the how long it will take for that recovery. So organizations are more focused on the recovery now. Yeah.
Thanks for the input. Hopefully the recovery will come fast. And next one is Philip. A gentleman here asked, because in your presentation, you actually mentioned that to secure a state nomination for the business visa, the candidate would have to make a trip to South Australia to understand South Australia more before they could actually do the submission for the state nomination. But currently, there is a travel ban to Australia. Would SA consider to make an exception at this present moment for the travel requirement?
I think you might find when the program does reopen, even though there is a travel restriction, there will still be a travel requirement. However, we understand that clients cannot travel, so there might be, I stress might, be an option that the client can still visit, but it will be once the restriction is lifted.
Okay.
So the client would then need to visit South Australia within a certain period of time after the restrictions are lifted. So we would approve the nomination and say 12 months within the date that the restrictions lifted, you need to have visited South Australia.
Could I understand in such a way that the client could actually submit his nomination now because of the travel?
I would say if we open the program tomorrow, for example, if we open the program tomorrow, hypothetically, and the client submitted and the client said, I haven't visited, and we would say, we would interview the client on the phone, we'd have a look at the nomination requirement, we'd approve the nomination. And as a condition of the nomination would be in there within X number of months of the travel ban being lifted, i.e. within 6 months of the travel ban being lifted, the client would need to visit South Australia. And if the client didn't visit South Australia within the 6 months, for whatever reason, then we would write to the federal department and we would revoke the nomination.
Okay, thank you very much for your update. The next one is Simon. I have a 132 clients here. Say he is in the midst of preparing his visa, but he is currently exploring option of investment or business opportunity in SA upon the visa approval. Could KPMG assist in this aspect?
Yeah, certainly. I think the way we approach these things is we can certainly have a discussion with the clients and get an understanding of key criteria. So what we try to do where we have a client or a potential investor into the state is first up understand the type of sector they would look to invest in, their existing experience as well, and where they might have appetite, their financial parameters, so check size, investment size, their liquidity preference, and that, I mean that in terms of if you're investing in a private operating business, there is going to be a longer term investment than some other investments, which may be a little bit more short term and have a finite period. But certainly can speak with them and understand what their criteria is, what their sort of time frame is to make that investment, and then consider what opportunities fit that criteria, which are either currently available or that we think we could open a door to.
Okay, thank you. There is a question here for Philip by Mr. Yusuf Abakar. He said if he were to go for a business visa subclass 188A, this is the business stream, do they have a minimum amount of investment he should invest into his business in Australia?
Now it depends if he's over or under 55 years of age and for the state requirement. And then it will also depend on which federal requirement he's looking to do. So I'd suggest speaking to Kitson to understand the type of business that he's looking to do, and then they can explain, or you guys can explain what the federal requirements would be at the permanent residency stage.
Understand. Okay. So Mr. Yusuf, sorry Philip, Mr. Yusuf, so we will get the Kitson consultant to contact you after this Facebook Live. Okay, again, Philip, this is by a provisional visa holder. His question is, I already got a state approved visa by SA government. Okay, and I in the midst of planning to start my business in South Australia, and I acquire a property there. But while I maintain my business and I will be staying in SA, but my son has an offer. I plan to send my son to other state to study. Could it be done such a way?
No problem.
No problem. Thank you very much. Okay. Okay. So the next one will be okay. I think because of KPMG, this is more about taxation question. I don't know, Ashley or Simon, can you take a bit on taxation question? As I said earlier, definitely will come up. Okay, this is by Mr. Yong. Mr. Yong said, I have an income in Australia, or I'm going to have an income in Australia. At the meantime, I'm maintaining my income in Malaysia. I understand that Australia have international tax, which means I have to pay. Do I have to declare also my income in Malaysia plus my income in Australia? If yes, I'm going to pay like 30% in Malaysia and 30% in Australia, which means I have to pay 60% income tax.
Yeah. There's several answers to this, and I'll give my disclaimer at the beginning. Obviously, we need to understand the full circumstances. So I'll just make some general observations around it. One of the criteria is if you're defined as a resident for taxation purposes, okay? So if you're a resident for taxation purposes, which is completely different or a question around what Philip's been discussing around PR, or if you're an Australian citizen, irrespective, a resident for taxation purposes, which is a number of factors, including but not limited to the amount of days that you're physically located in Australia. That will be one of the drivers. The other aspect is around how you've structured your affairs. Clearly, if you've got a business that is operating in Australia, that business would be paying taxation in Australia, assuming it's independent of everything else. So we would need to understand that, and invariably we structure our clients with companies or trusts, and in some cases in individual names, but generally not for an operating business. So they would just pay that tax that's applicable here. If though you are a resident in Australia and you do have income here, there's a number of things that we would look at, whether or not you needed to also include your personal income in your own name for that income out of Malaysia, and also if it's applicable to get credits for the tax that's already been paid. The main principle around taxation is no one's not paying tax. So it's around whether or not you're paying the right amount of tax in the right jurisdiction. So we're happy to discuss that in more detail. But yeah, please don't think just because you've got a visa that suddenly you're going to end up paying double tax. It very much depends how things are structured and your individual circumstances around that. So I appreciate, Jimmy, that's a bit of a general answer, but it is quite a technical area and something that we tailor the response for each individual client. I don't know, Anna, I appreciate you're online as well. If you had anything else you wanted to add on my comment.
No, but I guess the key principle doesn't matter where you're going to pay tax, is you don't pay tax twice on the same source of income. So that is the fundamental principle. Yeah.
Thanks, Anna. And also, you know, recently, both the Malaysian government and the Australian government were signatories to the Common Reporting System, or what we call CRS. So the information is actually shared between authorities on certain aspects of investment. So, you know, irrespective of, to be honest, most countries that you would want to live in are actually signatories to that convention, if that's the right term, around a common reporting standard. But again, Anna and I have done a fair bit of work in that space. Sorry, Jimmy.
Yeah, thanks for the update. So Keith, if you have any more question about the taxation, you feel free to contact KPMG. If you need, we can provide their contact to you. You can actually make have a personal conversation with KPMG about your taxation issue. We will take one last question before we end the session. For those who are not able to take your question, we apologize and we will contact you personally after this. This is a follow-up from the earlier question, which about the property loan for property development. He would like to know what is the current commercial interest rate for a property development loans currently in Australia.
So the interest rate is dependent upon two factors, right? That generally is applicable. One of them is the security. And appreciate you saying the development, but the lower the LVR, so Simon's mentioned the loan to value ratio, the lower that is, the better the interest rate that is applicable around that. And also the ability of that income, that asset or other assets to generate income to service that debt. I've literally been in discussion over a particular asset that we were able to get a rate just over 2% on the different things, so on the interest rate. So I would say you potentially could be in that 2 to 4% range, and I appreciate that's a fairly big gap, but just to give you a general feel for that. Unsecured money is obviously infinitely more expensive, and even if there was a degree of guarantees behind that, but again, fundamentally, it does depend around the quality of the asset, that gearing ratio or the LVR, and also the ability to meet that. But literally today, I was able to secure funds very close to 2% for one of my clients on a particular asset, which was property backed.
I'll just add to that as well. It also depends on the characteristics of the asset. So if you're looking at developing an office precinct and you have significant pre-letting, i.e. a major tenant who's taking up a large portion of that space, then the cash flows going forward to service that loan are going to be much stronger. And that's where you start to get to the lower end of the range that Ashley's quoted in terms of loan pricing or interest rate.
Okay, so it's safe to say the interest rate will be variance from time to time, depend on the applicants and the capacity of the applicant to serve the loan.
Applicant and project strength.
Okay, thank you very much. This is the time that we have for today. For those who are first time with us, do like our page that we will have this on a weekly basis, and you also can keep you updated from time to time on the current situations and of migration option available. And thank you very much to our speaker today for your precious time to spend with us and to share with us on what we have learned today.
Thank you very much, Philip.
Yeah, we will see you again.
Thank you, Ashley, for your support. Thank you, Simon.
Bye, Simon.
Yeah.
Thank you, Anna.
Bye.
Thank you, Kitson, and thank you very much for everybody's time today, and don't hesitate to reach out. So thank you again, Michael and Jimmy, and
Most welcome, most welcome. Thank you for joining us for this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.